All right, it's the post-game show, 3 o'clock, Wednesday afternoon. I'm Elijah Campbell. Again, no Jay Phillips today. We'll be back on Friday. A very, very busy sports week and a very busy sports night last night for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Men's basketball team falls to Georgia. Baseball team gets back on that horse and beats Davidson last night. Steph Curry, a DNP for the Wildcats, but doesn't matter. A win's a win. We'll get into all of that here in this opening segment. And there's a certain South Carolina Gamecocks player that is turning some heads in the world of the NFL. And I'm not one who's a big lover of the NFL scouting combine. I think some of the NFL scouting combine practices and some of the things that are done there useless, to say the least. It's not my favorite sporting event to discuss or watch. I think it's, I honestly find it to be terrible television, but it is helpful for certain players to put maybe some of the casual fans of the NFL who don't watch a lot of college football and maybe some scouts who take more value into a lot of the raw athleticism that goes into being in the NFL. It can put some of them on notice. And there's a certain South Carolina Gamecock player who made Todd McShay very intrigued. So I can't wait to play some of that for you as well. My man Jack Veltri is going to be joining me today from 3:30 up until 4. So he'll be on at the bottom of the hour. A whole lot of stuff to get into, even some updates from the SEC women's tournament now that we've tipped off. Currently in the middle of Georgia and Arkansas right now. Tennessee, my God, man, they boat raced Texas A&M today. Final score of 77-37. That was the first game of the tournament. Several other games going on tonight, so I'll go ahead and keep you updated to those as they happen. But let's go and start off with what happened at CLA last night. Look, my biggest takeaway is, well, two things. One, Georgia's urgency that they came into Colonial Life Arena with. Compared to Texas and Arkansas, two teams that are in very similar position to Georgia in terms of their place on the NCAA tournament bubble, where you have some really good wins on the resume, but you can't afford a bad loss. These three teams are grouped in with each other when it comes to being on what Joe Lunardi, calls the last four in or the first four out. They're kind of in the same boat. Like teams like Arkansas. Arkansas's got a really big win against Michigan. Michigan's still in contention for the Big Ten championship, even though that's kind of slipped away after what happened to them against Illinois on Sunday. Texas has some solid wins in conference on that resume, but some of the predictive metrics don't love them. The net doesn't necessarily guarantee them a spot in the NCAA tournament. They couldn't afford a bad loss, and both those teams came in here, got down early to South Carolina, and left Colonial Life Arena with double-digit losses, or double-figure losses, which is damaging to their tournament resume. I think Georgia came into the game last night knowing what's at stake, knowing that they can't afford a loss, and they were more aggressive on the offensive end of the floor than maybe Texas and Arkansas were. And maybe it helped Georgia that they've already played South Carolina once this year in Athens. And a lot of what we saw from the game last night was of the same ilk that we saw in Athens, right? Georgia blocked a ton of shots. That's what they do. That's one of the things that they do best is block a lot of shots because they got great size and really athletic dudes around the rim. They do a really good job of loading up to one side of the ball or one side of the floor, wherever the side the ball's on. They'll send more help defenders to protect the paint. They're as good as that as anybody in the country. That's one thing that even Nick Pringle mentioned last night after the game and media availability was that the thing that gave South Carolina a ton of trouble was how Georgia plays defense. Not just they play defense well. In college basketball, there's so much variance in how teams strategize to defend another team. Specifically with this Georgia team, they do a really good job of making it difficult for you to be able to drive into the paint because they load up on the ball side so well. Nick Pringle definitely made sure to note that. And if you look at the numbers too, South Carolina's two-point efficiency was as bad as it's been in a game all year. They only made 32% of their two-point shots last night. They took 28 shots inside the perimeter, made only 9. And then when it comes to getting shots within 4 feet of the rim, It was an astounding number. They only made 35.7% of their shots within 4 feet of the basket. 35%. And to give you an idea, the average team within 4 feet makes a little over, I guess, 53.5%. Oftentimes, because teams have rim protectors, or not all shots at the basket are uncontested. But those should be your high efficient scoring places. And Colin Murray-Boyles specifically has made other teams' lives hell when it comes to getting to the basket and efficiently scoring, because he's got really good touch. It didn't happen last night. Unlike Arkansas, Georgia was able to keep Nick Pringle and Colin Murray-Boyles out of the paint enough early on in the game to where South Carolina had to play catch up. And that's not what they had to do in the previous 2 SEC wins. Against Texas, they got a lead early in the game. They got it up to about 22 at a certain point and nursed it for its entirety. And then with Arkansas, they got up on Arkansas early, pushed that lead to 35, and then some garbage time buckets ultimately got it down below 20, but it was never really below 20 throughout most of the second half. Georgia got on South Carolina early, made them play catch-up, and took away the one thing that the Gamecocks do really well, or did in their wins, which is buckets near the basket and protecting the painted area. Georgia did it marvelously last night. I asked Lamont Paris after the game because, the players come in to the media room first, and that's what I asked Nick, because obviously as the big man, you're the one who's overseeing a lot of what happens inside the painted area. And he mentioned how well Georgia loads up on the ball side and how that gave this team a lot of trouble. So I wanted Coach Paris to elaborate on that a little bit after the game. So I asked Lamont what exactly this Georgia defense does so well to make life for their opponents a living hell inside the painted area. Here was his response.
No, they're good. They're good. They crowd the paint. They rotate in a manner that takes a shot away and discourages the drive. But really, they show a lot of attention around the basket and they have good length and athleticism in there. The idea was to try to drive and get in there, and if you had some clean looks, you can take them. But also then to try to get the defense to collapse, which they do anytime the ball gets in there, and then try to spray it out for some open threes. We did it a couple times. We didn't do it enough times consistently. I think they had 7 block shots. It's just when you're going against that length, maybe they get you once or twice, but then you gotta adjust and use shot fakes and ball fakes They did a good job of contesting, challenging, and altering our shots around the basket.
Error on me. That was actually the clip from him talking to Derek Scott after the game. The sentiment's the same, but I was able to pull up his question or his answer to my question from last night. He goes into a little more detail here.
They crowded the paint and rotated well out of it. It's just, it's harder when a team does that to play without having 4 guys at least on the floor that can make threes. It's harder. It's not impossible, that's for sure. You can get some advantages from a rebounding standpoint at times if you're strong with the ball, but it was crowded in there, and it was hard for us to make the reads and the decisions in that crowd that we needed to. But I thought we did a couple of good things of collapsing the defense and then kicking out for perimeter shots. We did that a couple of times. One by way of a post feed. We did it off of a dribble drive. I know, and right in front of their bench, we had a kick out for a 3. But we didn't stay committed to that as much. We had also times where we attacked, collapsed the defense, and then we tried to challenge the defense in a 1-on-1 or a 1-on-2 or a 1-on-1 where I'm 6'1" and their guy is a lot taller than that. And those can be hard situations. So we'll watch that and see what that was. But I think they really did. They were committed to crowding the paint and making you kick out. And we did it a couple of times, but not consistently enough.
And when it comes to kicking out, that's a really good point Lamont makes there, because what kept South Carolina in the game in the second half and what engineered a little bit of a mini comeback at a certain point was the ability to knock down open threes. Now, that is created whenever the defense does collapse and the ball draws 2 or 3 defenders like it did on a few occasions. It's one of the reasons why Colin had 5 assists last night, was because he's able to get in the paint whenever he wants, and then he'll kick it out and shooters knock down shots. And to South Carolina's credit, they were able to make a good amount of their threes. They were 10 of 23 on 3-point shots. And on the above the break threes, which are just non-corner three-pointers, they were 9 of 17. And there's not really many games this year where this South Carolina team has been that efficient from beyond the arc, but they needed to be last night just to make this a competitive basketball game. And that's maybe one of the reasons why that Georgia was able to hold on to the lead the way they did, was because they made South Carolina play and win a game in a way they're not comfortable winning, right? Like Morris Ugasuk had a really solid shooting game last night. Was 2 of 4 from 3. And as well as his team shot, they're not built to win a game by making 15 or 16 threes. And when you lose by 9, you probably need a couple more of them to go in, or at least to engineer more of those shots. And that's kind of what Lamont was alluding to in terms of a couple of times where they would get the ball into the paint, not doing a good enough job getting it out to where the open shooters are and trying to score amongst the trees, if you will, right? I mean, for lack of a better term, you look up and down this Georgia lineup. Asa Newell is 6'11". Dylan James is 6'9". RJ Godfrey, 6'8". They bring in Cyril off the bench, who's 6'11". All these guys also have really good bounce. Like, they are freakishly athletic bigs, and that makes life hard for any team that is trying to engineer their points at the rim, and that's why Georgia was able to block 7 shots last night. I think they had about 6 blocks in the first 25 some odd minutes of that game. And they kept South Carolina off the free throw line outside of Colin Murray-Boyles. Now, Colin drew a lot of fouls late, but he shot 18 of South Carolina's 21 free throws last night. The non-Colin Murray-Boyles players did not do anywhere near good enough job of getting to the rim and drawing fouls. And that's one thing that if you are going to try to get into the teeth of a defense and score amongst a team that will collapse the paint and load up on the ball side, you got to be able to draw fouls. And this Carolina team in the 2 wins they've had this year did a fantastic job of getting to the free throw line. Everybody, not just Colin Murray-Boyles, but everybody was able to do it. That wasn't the case last night. Again, Colin shot 18 of South Carolina's 21 attempted free throws during that game. The guards didn't do a good enough job of drawing those fouls, and whenever they do take it up into the teeth of that defense, the shot got blocked and not getting fouls. Lastly, too, this team was unable to get stops when they really needed it the most, right? I think Silas Demery last night kind of cemented his status as a Carolina killer defensively. Look, last year, when Georgia gave South Carolina one of their few losses at CLA, he had 15 points and hit a couple of big free throws and big buckets late in that game to pull off that upset. Last night, it seemed that anytime Georgia needed a bucket late, they went to Blue Cain or Silas Demery. Blue Cain hit a couple of big threes at the end of the game, and I think that's what ultimately led a lot of the Carolina faithful to start heading to the exits a little earlier than planned. Silas Demery led the team with 16 points. He also had 8 rebounds and 4 assists. That's a guy, too, that with his heroics for Georgia here last year and what he did last night, especially in that first half to create some of that early separation in a first half that saw Georgia score 40 points and, again, made South Carolina have to play from behind and play catch-up for the entirety of the game, that makes a really big difference. So I'm starting a category of guys who come to Columbia and make fans head to the exits early. And unfortunately, I think we have to add Silas Demery to the Carolina killer registry. I'm calling it right now because he did it for the 2nd year in a row. The guy's really good at that. But final score, Georgia 73, South Carolina 64.